Welcome, brothers and sisters, to the MeherBaba program. I'm your host, Fred Stankus, and today's guest is Ed Flanagan, a very special guest. Ed Flanagan is a former missionary priest who left the Far East in the late 60s to become a Madison Avenue film producer for 3 one-hour network TV specials for the General Electric Theater. He brought Mary Lou Williams, the great jazz pianist, out of retirement to produce her jazz rock liturgical work, Mary's Mass, commissioned by the Vatican Radio, then spent the next 23 years studying with Oscar Ichazo and teaching for Erica Institute in New York and London. There at Pete Townsend's home in 1975, he met Ivy Deuce and saw his first photo of Meher Baba, soon becoming his follower. Ed lives in Calabasas and is a renowned healer in the areas of weight loss, smoking, and phobias. He's also a writer and movie actor. Ed, welcome to the MeherBaba program.
Thanks, Fred. Nice to be here.
And Ed, you are now in the process of producing a book, a biography of your, well, it's actually part of a biography of your life, but also it's about Meher Baba, and it has a working title now, and that is what is called
Christ Come Again.
Christ Come Again. So Ed,
Yes.
why don't we go to a chapter in that book called The Empty Chalice, where you describe your life, and I'm going to give you some words that'll probably remind you of some of those early days. Hey, Champy, who was that?
That was my dad, Ed Flanagan Jr. I am, and in all my life, during his 93 years, I never once heard him call me Ed or Edward. It was always Champ.
I see.
And I was his champ.
And you had 3 sisters that were older than you.
I had 1 full sister and 2 older sisters that were half-sisters by my father's first wife, who died of cancer.
I see. And you were from a working Irish sort of family.
Yes.
Your father was in the
From
vending,
Boston.
the vending machine business.
Yes.
And you did help him sometimes with it, didn't you?
Yeah, I helped him.
And as your mother did too.
My mother and Dad worked mostly together from the early 40s on, and so I was sort of a latchkey kid. We had housekeepers and things, but I got to spend a lot of time on my own.
And what was this about when you were a young boy going to the movies? You apparently were scared of the movies.
I believed everything on that screen was real, and even Disney movies totally freaked me out. I didn't sit through my first full-length picture until I was 12 years old. I would hide under the seat or run out into the lobby to try to get grounded, or there was one theater that had these wonderful stars in the ceiling and clouds going by, and I'd look up, you know, and thank my lucky stars that I wasn't on that screen, you know, because I really believed everything up there.
And going to school, your instructors, I think, were sometimes, the teachers were a little bit dismayed at your lack of attention in the classes, and I guess they would ask you questions and you'd be daydreaming.
Well, yeah, I probably had, which is what we now known as ADD, you know, but I was very uninterested on anything that was going up on the blackboard. I couldn't read, I didn't know my numbers, but a P-38 would fly out outside the window. I could name it and tell you where base it was from and everything.
But then they send you to a clinical psychologist who did an evaluation of you.
He did a very, Children's Hospital in Boston, yes. He spent a couple of hours with me doing a lot of evaluations and tests and things like that. And at the end of it, and I only heard this many years later, he said to my mother, Mrs. Flanagan, there's absolutely nothing wrong with your son, and if he were my son, I'd really be very proud.
Oh, wow. And then so eventually...
So my mother... She stopped paying attention to the teachers.
That's good. So you finished your grade school and junior high, then you went to Boston
Latin School.
And that's a prestigious school.
Very prestigious
In fact,
school.
Is that where the TV show Boston...
yes.
what is called?
I forget the name of it.
Boston Public.
Boston Public, yes.
Yeah.
That was based on that school.
You were required to take Latin.
6 years of Latin before you graduated from high school.
And can you tell us what your scores were?
Minus 35 35s, minus 15s. I mean, once it was so bad. I can remember once my mother getting my report card, because you had to have your report card signed in those days, you know, and bring it back to school, running around the neighborhood saying, "Will you look at this? Will you look at, who could be so stupid to get a minus 50?
Not 35, you're speaking minus.
Minus, yeah.
My God, that's below the charts.
I think they kept me back 2 or 3 times before I finally got wise and left that school.
And you were really pals with your dad. Your dad would take you to what, to the Red Sox ball games?
Oh, yeah, no, mostly Braves games.
Braves
we were
games.
Braves
The Boston
fans.
Braves, that's right.
But more than that, he would take me to the vaudeville shows.
Oh.
So I saw all the great old vaudeville shows.
And that really grabbed you.
That really, show business started to really get into my blood, you know, really into my blood.
And then, but then after how long did you spend at Boston Public Latin High?
Well, I was there maybe 4 years.
And then you transferred to English High.
Then I transferred to English High, which was a rival school.
And that sort of was big for you. It really helped you.
Over there, I was like a hero coming back from the war, you know.
So in other words,
and I started to get on the honor roll, and I started to develop for the first time in my life a sense of self-esteem, which I'd never had before.
And so you had roots of a sort of a spiritual thread running through your life in early years, like you would take daily communion.
Yeah, I would go to Mass and Communion. Even at the age of 16, 17, I was a daily communicant. I'd get up early and went to mornings, 6 o'clock, and go to Mass before school. And on the way home from school, I'd stop by the chapel and pray, you know.
And I remember recalling in that chapter, The Empty Chalice, you said you had deep emptiness and a longing in my heart, which I begged God to fill.
I begged him to fill, and I didn't know it was for him that I was longing.
So how old were you? You were a teenager, weren't you?
16.
My God, that's amazing to have
16.
such a... So you did sort of have like, hey, the calling.
The calling had come from my past lives, I'm sure, you know.
And so then...
it wasn't necessarily a calling to the priesthood. I later in college interpreted that calling, that feeling that I had that Jesus was here again. And that he was calling me to a life of union with him. And being brought up Catholic, I thought that meant, oh, I should become a priest then. Now, whether that was a wise decision in retrospect or not, well, I don't know.
At that time, too, you got involved in community theater and also working on KMEX radio.
Yeah, WMEX in Boston. I was quite an accomplished radio actor as a child, actually, award-winning. Yeah.
And you were, what, doing classics?
We were doing classics, Dickens and you know, the general classics, and dramatize them on radio programs every Thursday evening on that local station.
And also...
I really enjoyed that. I love those radio days, yeah.
And you I guess, were keen on knowing about MGM. In fact, MGM
well, you know,
bust.
I'll tell you, when I saw An American in Paris with Gene Kelly, I must have been, what, 15? I went back and I saw that movie 3 times. And it started to get into my blood. And I used to go around, MGM was like my hero company, you know. One day I was going to be a great MGM director. I knew this. And I would go around writing graffiti, Arts Grazia Artists, MGM, all over. This is before kids ever did graffiti, you know. And then when I was in junior in high school, I read this book called The Next Voice You Hear. It was by Doris Shary. Now, Doris Shary was the studio chief at MGM. He had just toppled Louis B. Mayer. And it was in the early days of television, and he felt that MGM had to go in a different direction, away from the musical genre, and get more into message pictures. So they made this movie, The Next Voice You Hear, with Nancy Reagan, well, she wasn't Nancy Reagan then, and James Whitmore, and it was about God breaking his silence on the radio. And when I read the case history of the movie, from pre-production, the writing, the casting, the filming, the post-production, I was so fired up. This was such a great book. I wrote a personal fan letter to Doris Shary at MGM. And soon we started corresponding, and what do you know, he invited me out to MGM on my next summer vacation as their guest to see how movies were really made.
And so you came to Culver City.
So I came to Culver City. Now I'll tell you a funny story. When I got my first letter back from Dory Shari, it had the beautiful steel-engraved MGM logo with the lion, and under it said, Culver City, Washington Boulevard, Culver City, California. I said, Culver City? That's not Hollywood. It sounded like an old closed-down mining town, you know. And Washington Street, well, Washington Street was the slums where I came from. So it was a very undecidedly Hollywood address. But I said, oh, what the hell, I'm going anyway.
So you traveled on the 20th Century train.
Yeah, 20th Century Limited.
20th Century Limited with your father. And your dad got off at Chicago.
He got off at Chicago for a business trip, and I got on the El Capitan and went straight across the country on my first cross-country trip.
And in your chapter, in the book, you discuss how you were awed by the desert of Arizona, and you saw these huge...
the huge, giant saguaro cactuses in the moonlight at night crossing the desert it's an image in my mind I'll never forget. Really beautiful.
And so when you got to the MGM lot, you were really in awe of the 5,000 plus employees, a city within a city.
It was a city within a city. Cavernous sound stages. And I actually got to see Michael Kidd and Stanley Donen rehearsing dance numbers on one of the stages for Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. That was just before that, went before the cameras. Mm-hmm.
But after visiting it for, I guess, a short period of time, your parents said, come back home. It's college first.
Yeah, well, when I was out there, I visited the Pasadena Playhouse, and I said, by gosh, here's where I'm going to go when I get out of high school, and I'm going to study directing. And, of course, I went back home, and announced this to my parents. They said, oh, no, you're not. You're going to college for 4 years. Then, if you want to go to Pasadena Playhouse, you can. So.
How did you choose Catholic University in Washington, D.C.?
Well, they said, if you're going to go to college, I said, okay, if I'm going to go to college, then I'm going to go to a Catholic college that has a very good theater arts course. Because if I'm going to go to Hollywood, I'm going to need a good foundation in psychology and philosophy and theology and morality. Because if I go to Hollywood, I'm going to go to hell if I don't have this kind of foundation.
So your father and mother gave you the blessings to go to Catholic U?
They gave me the blessing to go to Catholic University.
So you go to Catholic U?
Yeah. $325 a semester, including room and board.
I think that buys a weekend now at college. So the thing is, you spend 1 year there.
I spent a year there. Now, every early spring, at the beginning of the second semester, every freshman has to do a religious retreat. What does that mean? Well, one weekend, you go on retreat for a weekend. So I go to the library and I get out these books on the mystics, St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, Little Flower, and I start reading the mystics. And I suddenly realized that I have a calling to the mystical life. That Jesus is not somebody 2,000 years ago, but that he's present now in my life, and he's calling me to a life of intimacy with him. Well, as I said earlier, I interpreted that as becoming his priest and serving others.
And so you then had a calling after 1 year to go to a seminary.
Yeah.
And what order was that?
Maryknoll. It's a missionary order. And of course, when I told my parents, I wrote them a letter after that weekend, and I said, oh, by the way, and guess what? I'm going in the seminary to become a missionary priest. Well, my dad fired a cable back to me. Do nothing until we see you at Easter. We are all shocked and very disappointed.
Aye.
Yeah.
So
the last thing he wanted his son to do was to become a priest.
So you did go to the seminary.
It was, we fought it out. I can remember coming home on my Thanksgiving vacation recess, and one Saturday morning we had it out. It was a lot of blood and tears, but I said, Dad, I have to do this. This is my life.
When did this bounty come in where your dad offered $10,000 if you came home?
Well,
that later
it
on?
was an fait accompli by then, so when I went to the seminary, actually, I continued in my sophomore year in the seminary. The seminary was in just outside of Chicago. He was on another business trip, so we went together on the train, the same train that we took Then I went to California. We go together to Chicago. He drops me off at the door on the seminary steps. And he says, "Champ," he says, "the day you want to leave, there's $10,000 waiting for you." God bless him, trying to bribe God.
My God. And now there's another connection with a famous superstar in Hollywood, Jon Voight.
Jon Voight was a year behind me, and
At
so
Catholic
I met
University.
at Catholic University. Now his best friend and my best friend were a guy named George Sheehan, who since died. He was a doctor, a wonderful cardiologist who died of heart condition, believe it or not. But George wrote me. He said, "Listen, Jon Voight, he's a freshman. He's an architect major, and he's not really happy in it. And we think he might have a vocation to the priesthood. Would you write him a letter and tell him what seminary life is like and this and that?" So yeah, I wrote him a letter, and I also told him what a great department the speech and drama department was at Catholic University. Well, he switched from architecture into speech and drama.
And the rest
is history.
Oh my, what amazing. And so also you were impressed by, I guess, Bishop Fulton J. Sheen, who
Fulton
I
J.
recall
Sheen.
too, was
Yeah,
big
he
in the
had
50s.
he had
and
this
60s.
wonderful TV show that was more popular than Milton Berle and Your Show of Shows with Sid Caesar and Imogen Coca and Howdy Doody, and it was a wonderful show called, television show called, gosh, I don't remember the name of it
Howdy
now.
Doody.
Yeah. Anyway, I met him just before I was going into the seminary, and he shook my hands and he said, "Ed, you are going to be very greatly blessed in your life."
Life is Worth Living. It was the name of it.
Life is Worth Living was the name of the show.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I remember growing up in the Midwest also, and my parents would be just sort of like setting aside time to watch Bishop Sheen.
Bishop Sheen.
It was like, and then we got into watching him, and we enjoyed it as a young kid.
More non-Catholics
Exactly.
than Catholics watch this program.
That's right. 'Cause
Nationwide.
He had a way of speaking right
It was
to
wonderful.
your, right
It
to
was
your heart.
really wonderful. It was real.
And
yeah.
so on June 20th of a certain year, you were ordained.
Yes.
And that was also a day, I think, of your sister's graduation, or?
Well, no, actually, that was the day I went in the seminary.
Oh, I'm sorry.
When I went in the seminary, they said, "Okay, if you want to go in the seminary, you have to go to summer school for your terrible Latin and make up some Latin credits at summer school, and then we'll let you continue in your sophomore year out at the Chicago division of the seminary." So my sister, meanwhile, had asked me to be best man at her wedding, which was
Oh, that's it, right.
June 20th.
June 20th, the same day.
Well, I got my marching orders to be at the seminary on June 20th, so my parents lost both their children on the same day. Now, they were dead set against the marriage, and they were dead set against me going in the seminary.
My, what a day.
What a day for them. It was really a very bad day. Still, they gave my sister a beautiful wedding. My dad walked her down the aisle, and then she went off on her honeymoon, and I took off on a train and went to the seminary. And that was it.
And I understand you studied Gregorian Chants.
I did. I was sent, about halfway through my seminary career, I was sent to study under one of the greatest Gregorian chant masters, Ted Marier. And this was also during a summer school session at the seminary, and I was studying in upstate, I was studying in Westchester at that time, Westchester, New York. And one day we got a call from Brian Halliday, who was Mary Mountain's husband, and he said, Richard Rogers is working on The Sound of Music about the Trapp family, and he would like to write some gregarious chant. We laughed. We said it's actually Gregorian chant, and you don't write Gregorian chant. It's a lost art. It came from a spiritual level that that no longer exists. But I said, there's plenty of chant in public domain. If you want to come up, we'll put on a concert for you. So 3 days later, he brought up 50 set designers, costume designers, and we put on this wonderful Gregorian chant concert for him. And I was assigned to Richard Rogers to show him how to read the Gregorian chant, how to read the notation. So
can you give us a little
I can
sample?
say I taught Richard Rogers Gregorian chant.
Yes. Can you treat us with a little bit of a Gregorian chant?
Okay, a little bit of the Our Father, as it was sung in the ancient days. Pater noster, qui es in celis, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra. Now that is the Our Father,
Wow.
or half of the Our
That's beautiful.
Father.
That's wonderful.
You don't hear that too often.
No, you don't. So, when your first assignment after you finish the seminary, your overseas assignment is Korea.
It's Korea.
And so you were in Korea how many years?
I was in Korea for 4 years, and I loved Korea until my 4th year, and something snapped. And all of a sudden, I started to hate being a parish priest. It was like being a parish administrator. It was like running a business.
So in other words, you were hoping to be a real missionary priest, but they then assigned you as like an administrator.
Well, you know, yeah, and pardon me for saying it, but the Korean Catholics were very, very reactionary, fundamentalists.
Oh, I see.
And they were bucking all the reforms that the Second Vatican Council was trying to institute, you know? And so it was, I felt like swimming upstream, you know? And after about a year or two of this, I got very, very disillusioned, and I told my superiors, you know, I says, I think I need some counseling. And I asked to be sent home for some counseling, and they refused. They said, Ed, you're one of our best men. You're great in the language. The people love you. We can put you anywhere. Somebody is sick, we can throw you in this parish. Somebody's going on furlough, we throw you over there. But what happened is I got very good at moving, but very poor at sinking roots into a parish where I started to get to know and love the people, you know. So this became a problem.
And you used to go to Japan, I guess, for a little R&R.
I would go to Japan on my vacations. That's where I really wanted to be.
And then there's one instance where you were invited to the American embassy, and well, that actually was in Seoul, where Frank Borman and Wally Schirra,
yes, I was invited
U.S.
to
astronauts, and so you had dinner with them.
I had dinner with them, yeah.
That must have been quite an experience.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
And then,
that was the early days of the space age when those were our real heroes, you know.
So then you went to Japan, and then you visited in Kyoto, a famous sacred garden.
The most sacred garden in Kyoto is called Ryoanji. It's a 13th century stone garden, huge expanse of raked gravel, and 15 most unusually placed large boulders. And I was sitting in that garden alone and feeling kind of depressed over my life in Korea. And all of a sudden, that garden became bathed in the most incredible light. And my mind slowed way, way down.
I think you refer almost to a question that's like a Zen question. What was your original face before you were born?
The original face before you were born was your eternal mind, which I suddenly tapped into. Now, I knew I also had this monkey mind down here that was running around and commenting on what was happening, but I was aware of this eternal mind for just those few minutes. And I knew that I wasn't meant to stay in that state, that I had to come back and live a normal life. But the experience of that garden really changed me. That garden entered me that day. And no matter where I lived after that, in Korea, in New York, in Boston, in LA, I've always built a replica of that garden in my backyard.
Wow. To this day, you have a garden now in Calabasas.
Beautiful, beautiful stone garden.
And then there's a Father Jack Dowd that you flew home with because he was leaving and you went to your superiors in Korea. And
yeah, what happened was, you know, finally I keep asking them, I got to go home, I need some help. And they sent me to oh, I know what they did. They sent me to an army shrink. And since I was not attached to the army, they couldn't really help me. And he saw me like as a favor. And the report he sent back is this guy needs at least 6 years of deep psychotherapy.
Oh my! So
I knew I was a bit disturbed, but not 6 years worth, you know. So what actually happened was, I went to my superiors and I said, listen, Jack Dowd's getting on a plane Wednesday night to go back to the States on furlough. I said, you're going to put me on that plane with him, or I'm going to get on my own. And if I get on my own, you're never going to see me again. So they had a meeting, and they said, okay, here's your ticket. You go immediately and report to... So I went home, and the day I got home to report to my superiors at Maryknoll was the day they shot RFK.
Wow.
Yeah. So he said, all right, you see the psychiatrist twice a week, you get yourself into a parish, you start helping out in parishes, get yourself enrolled in some courses, and make yourself useful and get back on the missions as soon as possible. So that's what I did, and he said, well, take some courses. So I enrolled in NYU Graduate School of Film and Television.
And so you enrolled at NYU.
Graduate School of Film and Television, and my teacher was Marty Scorsese's mentor, a guy named Haig Mnuchin.
Wow.
And Haig said, you know, you and Marty have something in common. You know, Marty was in the seminary, and he left the seminary to become a director, and you left the priesthood to become a director. He says, you guys should meet. I said, well, maybe one day we will, but so far that's not happened.
Well, we're going to sort of wrap this up, this first part here. We got the 2-minute sign just 30 seconds ago. But what I'd like this to whet the appetite for the audience of the next chapter of this program would be where you come in contact with, what's his name, Bob Rieger?
Bob Rieger.
Bob Rieger, who tells you about this MeherBaba, asking a question.
How a Catholic priest discovers MeherBaba is a story in itself.
That's going to be good. So that'll be next week.
Because what we believe is that MeherBaba is the return of Jesus in the 20th century. Now, MeherBaba said the priests will be the last ones to find me. So I feel myself doubly blessed, not only to have found him, but to have found him from such a low position.
That's wonderful. Until next time, as MeherBaba says,
Don't worry, be happy.
Thank you, Ed. See you next week.